What is up, guys? Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm talking about the A7 IV and why I think that it's just the absolute sweet spot when it comes to Sony hybrid cameras, and why I've grown to love it so much and think that you would too. A7 IV, a camera I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I've used it for tons of reviews. It's helped me accomplish some really cool things and even won a competition with it. So I'm not gonna go over every single little nerdy spec, but I am gonna hit on some of the features that I really liked and that just helped make this camera so easy to use. And we'll talk a lot about my personal experience with it, so you can kind of see why it grew on me so much and why it's kind of special to me. And hopefully it can help you make a decision if you're searching for a hybrid camera. So to start off with the most important thing, that's the sensor. It's 33 megapixels, has 15 stops of dynamic range, shoots in 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second, and it's actually downsampled from 7K, so it's like extra crispy. And then also shoots in 60 frames per second with the crop, which absolutely doesn't bother me, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And then you still get 120 frames, just not at 4K, it's at 1080p. So the 33 megapixels is just perfect for photography in my opinion, just because, again, if you're a hybrid shooter, you don't need some crazy giant file sizes with 60 plus megapixels. The A7S III, I believe, just has a 12 megapixel, and those look amazing. A lot of my other cameras that I've owned had a 24 megapixel sensor, and I mean, again, you still have room to crop in and it still looks great. But I think that 33 megapixels is just nice because it gives you that slightly more than a lot of the other competition. And obviously that just gives you and I that little bit of advantage because you can adjust your photos and crop them just that little bit more while still retaining a ridiculously high amount of detail. But again, while having files that are manageable, that don't fill up your cards crazy fast and fill up your computer. So obviously for photos, it's just hitting that sweet spot that we talked about. And then for video, if you don't know what that means when I mentioned that it has 15 stops of dynamic range, just think of it this way. If you're shooting in a high contrast scene with, bright brights and dark shadows, this sensor is just going to be able to retain a lot more of that information and just make for more beautiful shots, because when you are having to expose a little bit more towards the highlights or towards the shadows, you're not completely losing information on the other end, and it just allows you to see more detail in the video and it just looks nicer. And the reason that I say that 60 frames per second cropped isn't really a big deal, when you have any kind of action or motion going on and you want to capture it in slow motion, it's not going to look very cinematic or epic if you're really far away. You want to be a little closer to the action and the motion so you can see it in detail and it just looks more epic or cinematic. And most of the time you're not going to need 4K 120. Obviously it would be nice to have everything on a camera, but the problem is you start to leave that sweet spot because those files become so hard to work with. I mean, my PC isn't cheap by any means, and sometimes with the 60 frames per second, it's not really loading properly. I have to give it a second to kind of catch up, and then I can play it back and watch it. So I'm not talking about why the A7 IV is the best camera to ever exist. I'm talking about why this is just the sweet spot when it comes to Sony hybrid cameras. So I think those photo and video features offer everything that you need as a hybrid shooter without any of the stuff that would just be a little bit too much for a lot of us that we don't even need, and it would just slow down our computers and fill up our cards. I typically use the S-Cinetone picture profile when it comes to most things, just because it looks so good straight out of camera, and you can still kind of manipulate it and color grade it to kind of customize it to what you like. And I think for most people that's going to be plenty good. But if you do want to get into some really detailed color grading, this does offer S-Log3 and other log profiles, and so you can really go as professional as you want. And I've been using S-Log3 a lot more lately, but my go-to is still S-Cinetone because, again, this camera is all about making it easy for you, and that's why I really love it. And so that S-Cinetone, just so easy to work with, looks great. Now let's get to some of these features on the body, because that really does help separate a lot of cameras. I mean, you might have another camera that has just as beautiful of a sensor and you're getting just as nice of an image, but you don't have some of those convenient features that just make it quick and easy to use on the fly. The flip screen and ability to turn it if you're taking like a low vertical shot. I remember when I believe it was the A6600 when that one first came out, and it only had the tilting screen, or maybe that was the A6500, I'm not sure. But one of the ones that I had, it didn't come around so you could see yourself vlogging, or you know, even when I'm recording videos like this, sometimes I like to be able to check that sometimes so I can see that everything looks good. And then not having to get my like face and chin all the way on the street if I'm trying to take some cool street photography. There's a lot of other nice hybrid cameras out there now from Sony. For example, the A7C2, that one's gotten super popular, and there's some people that say that they like it more because it's more compact or whatever. I mean, this isn't that big of a camera. Yeah, it's full frame, but it has a nice grip and it doesn't weigh a lot. It's not like I feel like I'm ever carrying around a brick or anything. I like having a full viewfinder versus just a little tiny viewfinder that you get on the A7C2. I like having the dual card slots on this that you get. Believe it or not, sometimes even your really expensive SanDisk V90 SD cards, they fail, and it may not happen very often, but it has happened to me, and believe me, when it happens, it's like the end of the world when you don't have a dual card slot. If you spend a lot of time getting all these nice shots and now you gotta completely restart and you have to wait till your next day off or whatever, I mean, that's just, forget about it. Like you're gonna be done. The A7C2 is basically like a more compact version of the A7IV, and I'm not just the only one saying that. I've heard a lot of people say that, and they say that in like a beneficial way, like a positive way. But for me, like I mentioned, it's not really a positive because it's got the capabilities of an A7IV, but it's lacking some of the main features that I personally really want, like the full-size viewfinder that makes a huge difference in photography, and those dual card slots to just give you that reassurance and peace of mind. So for that reason alone, I would always pick this guy over the A7C2. The autofocus on this thing is insane. I mean, that goes without saying. Sony has probably the best autofocus out there. When it comes to those lenses, you have so many options from Sony. I mean, they just keep putting out more amazing lenses every year. From your more expensive top tier G Master, if you want the best of the best, or even like a lot of the G series lenses, which is like right under their top tier. They offer something for pretty much every price range. And then all the support from Sigma and Tamron and other third-party brands that make really competitive lenses that are honestly just as good, sometimes even better. I mean, the fact that you pretty much eliminate any kind of focus breathing if you're using a Sony lens on this, because this has breathing compensation. So lens selection is just absolutely top tier when comparing to non-Sony cameras. I remember when this camera came out, it had a lot of firsts for Sony. For one, this ability to quickly switch back and forth between the photo and video mode and have all your settings saved on each one. So it was a small thing, but to me it was such a big feature and almost kind of game changing for hybrid shooters, because if you are out and about, I mean, you might miss a shot that you wanted to get if you're having to switch your settings every single time you go from photo to video and vice versa. I mean, you couldn't really ask for a more efficient system when it comes to switching throughout settings, which I think is very important for hybrid shooters. And then to add to that, you have all the custom buttons. Not only do you have 4 different custom buttons, but then everything else can pretty much be customized as well. All your dials, you've got one on the front, you've got 2 back here. This used to just be an exposure compensation dial, and now you can use it for whatever you want, and it has a lock on top. You know, sometimes you get something in your hand and it feels kind of cheap, and the buttons just feel kind of cheap, but all these, they feel super good, tactile. It's just nice when everything feels good and holds up well. I mean, I've owned this thing for a couple years now. I think almost 3 years. Yeah, it's coming up on 3 years. And so I've used it a lot, and all my buttons, all my dials, everything works just like it did on the first day that I bought this thing. Everything looks pristine still. So obviously they did something right. Even just the placement of the record button being right on top and right next to the shutter button. Some of my old Sony cameras had a tiny little button that was like indented on the side, and it was really awkward. You basically had to break your grip to be able to push the button because it was on the side. Even that being adjusted just helps add to that convenience of this camera. And even some of the super tiny things, like the fact that they thought to put some little like plastic retainer thing on this camera strap loop, because you shake it around and you don't hear any movement. I mean, I'm shaking this right in front of the mic, and yeah, you can just take these things off, and I typically would because I normally attach my camera straps from the bottom. If you're curious why, just watch like my Peak Design camera strap video. I think I mentioned it there. But some people like having the camera straps attached from the side, and so that's just one less thing that's not gonna get in their way when you're sitting there trying to vlog and you just keep hearing that rattling sound. I mean, that's the only reason why I didn't bother taking these off, is because they don't cause any issues. And the camera just looks awesome as well. I mean, it has like a nice matte finish, and it's pretty weather resistant. And then speaking of cool, when this camera first came out, it was like the first one that could kind of close its shutter when you had the lenses off of there to kind of keep any dust from landing on your sensor. And it just looks so cool. It looks like it has like armor plating or something. You can turn that feature off, and then you can still just have your sensor exposed. Obviously, that's what you would do if you would have to clean the sensor or anything like that. But it's nice having that option, especially if you know you're gonna be in a dusty environment or in the desert, and you have that on, and then when you're switching lenses, you're not getting dust on there. Now, as for why this camera is kind of special to me and why I like it so much, for one, a lot of that is because it was my very first full frame camera. I was waiting for the right one, I guess you could say. I was satisfied with using Sony's APS-C cameras. I own the A6500, the A6600. Obviously now I own the A6700, which I'm recording on it right now. But I just kept waiting because obviously it's still a pretty big investment, and I was just kind of hoping that Sony would release a camera that just wowed me. And when this guy first came out, I mean, it wowed me. And again, the fact that it still holds up, that's just a testament to how good this camera is. And throughout the last couple of years, I've gotten a lot of cool photos and video with my family and my little girl. And I've taken this camera on the road, traveling in different cities, and it's never let me down. And like I said, I won a competition. If you're familiar with a YouTuber named Chris Brockhurst, he's a really cool photographer, videographer. And anyways, he was holding a competition, one lens film he called it, where you make some sort of a little 5-minute film, and the challenge basically was just to use one lens the entire time. It was just a couple months after I bought the camera, maybe 2 months or something, and so I went ahead and entered into the competition with this. And even though I've gotten a lot better since then, that video was good enough to win. And I mean, I don't know how many entries there were, but I mean, he's got a lot of subscribers, so it was pretty cool that I won. And nothing crazy, but I got a year-long subscription to Epidemic Sound and $500 cash, which was really cool. And obviously, when you're gonna recommend something to somebody, it's gonna be based off of how you've experienced that product. And I've had nothing but good experiences. I mean, there's just been no situation where the camera has let me down, no issues, no freezing, no anything. Nothing I can think of. Every single time I've needed this and I've needed to get certain shots or do something with it, it's done it, and it's done it with ease, and it's looked amazing. What else do I need to be able to recommend something other than that? And so I hope whatever camera you end up getting, that you can enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed the A7 IV. And again, we're not talking about the best camera of all time. We're talking about the sweet spot for hybrid shooters. And it's not like I'm not gonna buy the A7 V whenever that comes out. As far as I know, it's not even been announced or anything like that. But when it does come out, I am gonna go ahead and buy it. But it absolutely won't be because I feel like the A7 IV is lacking, or like it's missing something that I need to be able to accomplish what I want to accomplish. Like, this thing has everything I need to be able to accomplish anything that I would personally take on. And so if I wasn't literally somebody who makes YouTube videos, you know, reviewing camera gear and a lot of Sony equipment, then I wouldn't probably bother. With all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching till the end of the video. I really appreciate it. And I know this one was a bit of a rant because I'm just kind of spilling out random features and experiences I've had with it, but that's kind of what this video was going to be from the start, because I just wanted to try and express to you guys how much I really have enjoyed this camera. If you like this kind of content, like anything that has to do with Sony cameras, lens reviews, camera gear, camera backpacks, and camera straps, anything like that, definitely subscribe. I've got a good amount of videos on my channel, but I'll be putting out a lot more in the future. So once again, just thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.